So after you create your 3D sculptures, you're going to want to make them a little pretty, a little more colorful. Now, right now, I have a 3D object, a simple 3D object in the scene, and you can see that it is very ugly. Well, not ugly, but just boring. So what we want to do, we want to have the ability to add color to our 3D objects. Now, in order to do that, you have to come across a property or a component of a 3D object. Now, 3D objects have points in space that help define itself in 3D space. Now, that same 3D object is going to need to have a way to define itself in 2D space. Now, 3D and 2D space sounds kind of, having all these spaces, is pretty confusing. A lot of people are like, well, 3D space is hard enough to get my head around. Why do you have to add 2D space involved? Now, now the reason is it's kind of hard to bring in a 3D object into a 2D program like Photoshop. Now, there are programs that will allow you to color uh, to color your 3D objects as 3D objects, but we'll ignore that fact for a moment. So let's say that we have this 3D object and we want to apply a 2D picture onto it. Now, in this case, it's pretty straightforward because this 3D object really doesn't have. It's really simple, and the fact that it's actually 2D really helps. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and apply a 2D texture to the object. So I'm going to go ahead and apply that, and I'm going to go ahead and slide in the 2D representation of our object. All right, here we go. Boom. So on my right, I have my 3D object. On the left, I have my 2D representation of the same object. Now, I'm going to go ahead and just show you one more time. Remember, I had moved this point. Let's see what happens when I move that point again with a texture or with all this color on our 3D object. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and move this, and you can see that the picture is kind of being distorted. The picture's within the frame still. We can still view the whole image, but we are skewing the top, or we're skewing the whole entire image on the picture. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to undo that a little bit. Okay. So now we're back to square one. So I'm going to go to my 2D representation of my object, and I'm going to go ahead and then move that same point. And let's look what happens. Alright, the image is skewing, but it's not really the same thing. What's happening is it's saying, alright, we're going to take we're going to take this point of our 2D space and just bring it down. So we're only going to show what's in here. So everything within this line is going to show up in the image here. So let's give you a good example. So let's say I no longer want to have this border in my image. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to all my points and just come down. And as you can see, on the top, the border no longer exists. And on the bottom, it's still there, almost. There. There we go. Not quite, but there we go. So now you can see that I kept my 3D object the same, but I was able to move my 2D, to move the 2D representation of the object, and you can see that it changed the final coloring of the 3D object. So let's say that I wanted the heart to fill up the space. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go ahead and move this down, and you can see that the heart now takes up most of the 3D object, the coloring of the 3D object. So I'm going to go ahead and undo that. Now we're going to get a slightly more complex model, not much. Boom. I'm going to say, well, Ray, it looks exactly the same, but as you can see, as I click on it, it's not. Okay, so now I have more points defining my 3D object. Again, it's slightly more complex, but I'm kind of walking our way up into understanding what UVs are. So I'm going to go ahead and move this point in 3D space again, and let's pay attention to what happens. Now you can see it is different. I mean, the image is still distorting, but it's only distorting in this quadrant because we have these points helping to define our 3D object. So anything that's going to distort is only going to happen within this face, this plane. I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to go ahead and go to my 2D space, and I'm going to move that, and you can see that it is only distorting this quadrant. Okay, so the rules still apply when you move points in the 2D space. It affects the the texture or color in the 3D space. So I'm going to go ahead and move this, and there we go. Now let's say again we wanted the heart. Let's say we wanted the heart to appear in this quadrant over here. So I'm going to go ahead and take this and just slide that in there, and you can see that everything else doesn't look too good, but the heart is now in this quadrant. Again, this is just real basic intro into UVs. There are a lot more functions that you can do, but just trying to get you around, just trying to grasp the idea of basically what UVs are. They're just a 2D representation of your 3D object. Now we're going to go, I have two more examples. I'm going to go three more examples. So I'm going to go slightly more advanced with my next example, or not advanced, but slightly more detailed, just kind of nail everything home. So I'm going to go ahead and hide this, and yep, you guessed it, another plane. And again, it is slightly more, it's divided one more time. So we have 16 parts, and I'm just going to go ahead real quick and just show you that the idea still is the same. So I'm going to go ahead, slide this down, slide it over, and this quadrant is the only or not quadrant, but I don't even know what that would be. So this segment is the only segment that gets distorted if I move that, and if I take this, if I take my 2D representation and then move it, you can see that this is the only segment that gets distorted. Alright, so you probably get the idea now how the 2D representation relates to our 3D object. So let's go ahead to a slightly more complex example.